If there's a Mount Rushmore for Spider-Man artists, then there is no doubt John Romita Sr. is on it. Spidey has been blessed with many amazing artists, from co-creator Steve Ditko to greats such as Ross Andru and Todd McFarlane. But no one, and I mean no one, has had the impact on J. Jonah Jameson's least favorite superhero than the jazzy one. John Romita's artwork helped Peter Parker come of age and turned Spider-Man into Marvel's signature hero. He also introduced us to one of comics' greatest leading ladies, Mary Jane Watson. And his gift for character design helped birth heroes like Wolverine, Luke Cage, and the Punisher. Let's go behind the panel on the amazing and spectacular career of John Romita Sr. Before he became comics royalty, John Romita Sr. was simply a comics fan. He read Superman and other Golden Age titles and was a die-hard fan of cartoonist Milton Caniff. After a stint in the army during the Korean War, Romita got his foot in the comic book door. He drew all types of titles during the 1950s, from horror books to Captain America adventures. But it was his work on DC romance titles, like Girls' Romance and Young Love, that made him a standout. When DC axed most of its romance books in the mid-60s, the artist found himself desperate for work. Romita briefly considered going into advertising, but a long lunch with Stan Lee convinced him to stick with comics. His first work for Marvel was in 1965, inking Jack Kirby's cover for Avengers issue 23. He followed that up with a short stint on Daredevil, a book the artist wanted to stay on. But then Steve Ditko suddenly quit The Amazing Spider-Man, and Romita's life and comics history would soon change.
Your Spider-Man is very different from Ditko's. How would you describe the difference between what Steve did and what you did with Peter Parker and with Spider-Man and everyone else?
Well, some of it was technique, because I was a brush man. Ditko was a pen man. I felt obliged to do Spider-Man and 9 panels like Ditko, because that's what the fans are used to. And I tried for the first year. And I think maybe in the beginning of the second year, I started to cheat and use a brush a little bit more. Slowly but surely, Stan said, you know what? Don't try anymore. Do it the way you want to do it.
Romita's smooth line work transformed Peter Parker from the awkward, nerdy teenager of the Ditko years into a handsome college guy. He even put puny Parker on a motorcycle. His Spider-Man was more muscular. And because no one in comics could draw women as beautiful as Romita, Pete's love interests, Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane Watson, were absolute knockouts. Romita and Lee turned Spider-Man into the greatest soap opera in comics. Some fans complained that Spidey had gone too mainstream and strayed too far from Ditko's tortured, angst-ridden depiction. But within a year of Romita's arrival, Spider-Man overtook the Fantastic Four to become Marvel's best-selling title. The Lee Romita years had numerous high points, including Spider-Man No More from the legendary 50th issue, features one of the most iconic images in comics history, with Peter leaving his Spidey costume in the trash. It's a scene so fondly remembered, it was recreated for the movie Spider-Man 2. If you ask 20 fans for a favorite Romita Spider-Man story, you'll likely get 20 different answers. When we asked the artist, his pick was surprising.
Is there a specific issue of Spider-Man that you remain proudest of?
Two continuing stories, 108 and 109.
That's impressive, and I bet you it's going to surprise a lot of people. I would think most people would go back to issue 50, Spider-Man No More, or something like that, but that's very
this is because of the technique. I'll tell you why. Because I always felt like a visitor on Spider-Man. Like I was always doing Ditko somehow. I was trying to keep the character consistent. So I didn't plunge in there as John Romita. I was doing my duty as Spider-Man. So all the early ones, I'm doing duty. But by the time 108 and 109 comes around, when I'm doing my second turn on Spider-Man, then I'm different. I'm a different person. I took my number 5 brush out, and I did Milton Caniff all over those pages. You'll see more blacks and slashing clothing lines than ever I did in Spider-Man. And there are scenes in there that I'm very proud of. I wish I had kept the originals. I always felt like I'm a follower. People used to say he's a creator. I said, oh, no create. I didn't create Spider-Man. I didn't create any of this. Ditko, Stan, they created Spider-Man. What I'm doing is I'm illustrating it. I'm an illustrator, and I'm a storyteller. But I didn't create anything. I always tell them, never call me a creator.
Of course, he was much more than just an illustrator. He co-created classic Spidey villains such as the Rhino, the Shocker, and the Kingpin. As the co-architect of the stories, he was as responsible as anyone for the personal melodrama that was the secret to Spider-Man's success. When Jerry Conway replaced Stan Lee as writer of The Amazing Spider-Man, it was Romita who provided a steady, experienced hand for a smooth transition.
Fortunately, I had John Romita as the artist on the book, who was given first position on the credits because he was going to be guiding me. And that really helped a lot in that first year that I was working on the book.
During the 1970s, Romita became Marvel's art director. His fingerprints were all over the company's publishing output during that decade. He drew hundreds of covers featuring just about every Marvel hero. He also redesigned the Black Widow and gave her a costume that would become her trademark look. He helped create Bullseye and Tigra. He also had a hand in creating the visual concept for the Punisher and Wolverine, as well as Luke Cage. That character's original costume was one design Romita would come to regret.
I think I went overboard designing it. I mean, with the chains and the headband, especially too much slavery, smell of slavery in there. It was stupid of me. And I was hoping that it was either succeed or fail, or somebody would change it, because I used to feel embarrassed of it. I thought I overdid it. And yet, you could make a point that that may have been what made it memorable. I don't know. Maybe I didn't do it too much. I thought I overdid it. The fact is that it was an embarrassment for a moment, but the fact that it lasted and became popular satisfied me. And I was, okay, I gave it a push, and now the motor is running and I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Perhaps Romita's most important contribution to Marvel was a character with no superpowers. The first appearance of Mary Jane Watson in the final panel of Amazing Spider-Man 42 is one of the most memorable introductions in comics history. Steve Ditko and Stan Lee may have created her off-page, but it was John Romita who brought Mary Jane to life. The artist said his take on MJ was inspired by Anne Margaret in Bye Bye Birdie. She became an instant fan favorite. While Gwen was Peter's girl in the comics, even Stan Lee joked that it was obvious Romita preferred the fun-loving redhead. Years later, it was Romita who suggested what would become Marvel's most controversial storyline, the death of Gwen Stacy.
This was at the transition period where John was going to be leaving the book and Gil Kane was coming on as the penciler. But before he left, John was saying, you know, we need to do something to shake up the readers and to make them recognize that there are consequences. So he thought we should kill off a major character.
Milton Caniff was my idol. Terry and the Pirates was the best scripted strip in history. I'm 13 years old, 14 years old, and I'm in a grocery store. Two grown men are in front of me in the grocery store. And they say, did you hear Raven Sherman died, was killed? And I'm saying to myself, holy mackerel, grown men are talking about Raven Sherman. I thought I was the only guy that thought these people were alive. As a kid, that's my domain. Terry and the Pirates, what are you doing talking about Raven Sherman? Important characters you kill, because that's if you want to shock your reader and say this is really happening. Make them believe this is possible. That's the reason I did it. Jerry Conway said, I think it's a good idea. He seems to have forgotten that's what I told him. But the truth of the matter is, the proof of the pudding is, we're still talking about it. Am I right? Am I wrong?
It was as big a shocker as you've ever seen in comics.
And if Aunt May had died, they would have forgotten about it the next day.
And then Stan was out of the country. You guys did it when Stan was out of the country.
Oh, he was mad as hell. But I always tell them, Stan, they're still talking about it.
With Gwen gone, MJ would eventually become the love of Peter's life and the most important character in the Spider-Verse outside of Peter Parker. When the couple got married in 1987's Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21, Romita did the cover art even though it had been years since he'd worked on the title. It makes perfect sense because for an entire generation of fans, Romita drew the definitive version of Marvel's favorite couple. No artist has ever had the impact on a Marvel character like Romita had on Spider-Man. For roughly 2 decades, his rendering of the hero was the face of the company. It was used on all kinds of merchandising, from comics to calendars, Slurpee cups, even toilet paper. For young fans who discovered the character through the Spidey Super Stories comics, it was Romita's wall crawler they first saw, since he did nearly every cover for the series. He even helped launch the Spider-Man newspaper strip in 1977 with Stan Lee and drew it for 3 years. He retired from full-time work in the early 1990s to spend much of his time at home with his wife and childhood sweetheart, Virginia. He would, however, still pick up the pencil for special occasions like the 30th anniversary of The Amazing Spider-Man. During his time as art director, Romita was known for always having time to offer advice to newcomers and give constructive feedback.
John Romita Sr. Is now the guy who's kind of took me under his wing. And now he's really refining me, going, you need to work on this and this and this. And he fine-tuned me. He even my first project was What If Daredevil Killed the Kingpin? And I still remember, I had a downshot police with a van, and they were kind of scattershot. And he took some tracing paper and he goes, you have to join these so that it's a cohesive composition and make like a beeline. And once I got to this point, it was actually John Romita Sr. who went knocking on the doors for me and saying, you have to give this guy work. You have to give this guy work, because nobody's giving me work. And so he got me a bunch of one-shots.
One young artist who didn't get much help from Romita was his own son. John Romita Jr. is a superstar in the business in his own right. But when he was looking to launch his career, his dad wouldn't even hire him.
A few of my colleagues had sons and daughters that wanted to be artists and would be given a shot. Most of them failed. And I figured if my son tries to get into comics, I know he could draw, but he wouldn't let me see his drawings for a long time. He said they're not good enough. All I knew is that if he ever got into comics and failed, it would be a wall between us. I wouldn't be able to talk about comics in the house. It would be a downer. And I just hoped he wouldn't do it because I didn't want to take that chance. Now, I'm grateful that he did it because he had the guts to do it. He didn't care. And by the way, he did take a lot of flack from wise guys in the office. One guy told him if his name wasn't Romita, he wouldn't even be working at Marvel. And he took it on the chin. He didn't punch anybody. He just smiled his way out of it.
And John's a big guy.
And he could have laid out the guy who said that, I'll tell you that. Now, I'm very proud, let me tell you, I'm more than proud of him. He didn't have to be a carbon copy of anybody. He was himself from the day he started drawing. He says he was trying to draw like me. It never came out like me. It was always him. And that is something very important, because most of the failures were the guys that could do a drawing like their dad, but not anything else.
John Romita once said he regretted not being born 5 years earlier, so he could have been part of the first generation of comic book artists. He certainly made up for lost time. His elegant artwork and dynamic storytelling turned a quirky, idiosyncratic teen hero into a pop culture icon. His flair for character design helped create some of Marvel Comics' most enduring heroes and villains, and he did it with grace and class. John Romita Sr., a legend and a gentleman. Next time you visit your local comics shop, see if they have a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 365. That's the 30th anniversary issue. The book has a 9-page backup story called I Remember Gwen. It features gorgeous artwork by Romita, spotlighting the two loves of Peter Parker's life, MJ and Gwen. It's a keeper.